Hey guys, welcome back to more real estate stories. In this video, a guy was threatened with $60,000 per day in fines for building a pond on his private property. Here is what happened. And the first one is titled, "Am I the jerk for moving out of my house because I've had enough?" So I've lived with my parents up until the age of 23. Now I know that's late, but I live in an Indian household and usually you don't move out until you are married. Now I don't mind this, or I should say I would not mind this if that house was not a total hellhole. There's a total of 8 people living in that house with only 3 rooms. My dad decided that we should bring our grandparents to this country and he has not told me why. So I have to share my room with 2 adult cousins who decided to immigrate to this country to get a better job, but they don't seem to want to move out anytime soon. And let's not forget that it is so loud. I'm a nurse and when I come home I like to relax, but I cannot when there are 2 very loud people entering and leaving my room whenever they feel like it with no courtesy of being a little quiet. So I decided I had enough. I searched for an apartment near my workspace and I found a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. I told my parents that I'm moving out and they flipped out. My dad started yelling at me that I'm not married yet and it would be rude for me to move out before I'm married. My mom started crying and telling me how could I just leave her like that. I tried to ignore them, but they kept trying to stop me, so I told them that I just cannot live in a place where I don't get any respect. So I've been living in my apartment for just a little over a week, and let me tell you that this was the best decision I've ever made. My brain is no longer exploding from being in such a loud house. Because I get to control the noise that goes around in my apartment, I cannot believe that I didn't move out sooner. But my relatives keep telling me that my parents are heartbroken, especially my mom, that I don't care about their feelings. How am I supposed to care about their feelings if they cannot understand mine? But I won't lie, I'm feeling just a little bit of guilt for leaving out of the blue. Did I make the right decision here? Was it okay for me to do that? And for those of you asking, no, I'll not be giving them a spare key because that would literally turn my life into hell. They already know my address, but the apartment complex is gated, so they cannot come in without my say-so. And yeah, ripe stars, let me know what you think about this one in the comments. I would say OP is definitely not the a-hole. The parents are absolutely overstepping boundaries, OP is not a kid anymore, and the parents are going way too far. Anyway, some people on Reddit said, not the a-hole, you need space and quiet. Firstly, because you are your own person, and secondly, because you're a nurse in this pandemic. They should doubly respect you for that. Try inviting your parents, specifically your mom, over to your new place. That might help her feelings. And honestly, ripe stars, it just feels like this person's family is simply controlling, and it's not like OP really hurt their feelings, she simply hurt their sense of control. Anyway, comment number 2 said, not the a-hole, you're a grown working adult, you can live wherever you want. It's clear your parents strongly value family, but you need to do what's best for yourself. Maybe you can visit them regularly, like a weekly lunch dinner, so they can still see you. Comment number 3, not the a-hole, you have a right to live your life your way just as they had a right to make the decisions they did in their lives. I understand your feelings, and the fact that you're feeling guilty to me shows that you didn't do it out of disrespect or to spite them. Your guilt is coming from a place of love for them. Of course you don't want to hurt their feelings and that's why you feel bad. Continue to love them and do the best you can to mitigate the way they feel. You may not be able to change their minds on your decision, but you can continue to show them how much they mean and that you love them. Allow them to have their opinion, stand by yours. Congratulations, by the way, on a milestone in your life, and thank you for the service you do in your job. And now we got an update to the story, and it reads like this. A while ago I made a post talking about how I moved out of my parents' house because the living situation was just not livable for me anymore. Here's the link. Well, some time has passed now, and I cannot say that things have gotten better exactly. I invited my parents over to my new apartment and had a talk with them about how this apartment is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I don't plan on moving back into the old house anytime soon. They remained calm, but after about 10 minutes of talking, they suggested something that I hoped they would never suggest. They suggested that I let my cousins, who were a massive part of the reason I moved out, move in with me because, frankly, there's no room left in the house. I never thought that I would do something like this, but after they suggested that, I exploded. I yelled at them, saying that they should have thought about that before I was about to move out due to my mental health deteriorating. I told them that they are never allowed to move in with me, and I don't have any room for them either. They yelled back saying that I'm being way too disrespectful and I should watch my tongue around them. My mother started tearing up, but I don't care about that anymore. All the guilt that had built upon me for moving out had disappeared in that moment. I had them leave and told the watchman to never let them in without my approval. So yeah, while the situation didn't at all get better, the guilt I had in my heart and mind from the last post is now completely gone because I've realized that Indian parents care not about their children's health but their status in their families. Cousin's parents suggested they move in with me, and they agreed more. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I feel so bad for OP. That is such a toxic family situation. But to be honest, from what I've heard so far, because actually I have quite a few Indian friends, stories like these are not exactly uncommon in quite a few Indian families. It seems like they often like to control their children. Anyway, the next one is the title story, and it's titled, I was threatened with $60,000 per day fines for building a pond on my private property. I own more land than I know what to do with and decided when my wife turned 40 years old to do something that would make her happy. She loved the water, but we didn't live near anything great, so I decided that screw it, I was not using all of my land and I would build her a beautiful pond on my property. Not like one of those giant ponds, but something fairly sized she would like, maybe big enough to swim in and have fish. Before I did anything, I decided to make sure that I would be able to do this without getting in trouble. A project like this required a ton of permits and paperwork to sign before I could do anything. Not to mention hiring workers to dig up the land and it being in the exact right spot per the permits. After about 3 months of paperwork and waiting, it was dug properly and I could go ahead with making it how I wanted. I added water along with some pond-appropriate fish and vegetation. It looked better than I thought it would and had almost everything my wife wanted. I could not make it a surprise, so she was excited the entire time, waiting for it to be done and loving that I did it for her. The only aspect I couldn't incorporate was some kind of waterfall, which I knew she loved. That would have needed maybe a separate structure and a pump and stuff that was too complex for me to work out and probably wouldn't look nearly as good as it could in my head. My wife loved the pond and I was a big fan of it too. The water was clean and we took care to make sure that it stayed in good condition. The fish were thriving and we had geese regularly stopping on our property, knowing it was a place to get a drink of water and have a little swim. About a year after I got the pond, I started getting letters from the federal government saying that my pond was illegal and messing with the natural environment of the area. They wanted me to destroy the pond over a whole list of claims that were just totally wrong. First, they claimed that I was trapping wildlife and keeping them in a way aside from being a pet or business. They were not talking about the fish either. They were talking about the geese and ducks that took it upon themselves to use our pond as a break. But they would always leave and we were not keeping them. The only animals that kind of stuck around were some frogs that ended up by our pond. But we did not put them there or do anything to stop them from leaving. The second thing was that they were claiming our water was polluted and could interfere with the quality of the water for the entire county. That made even less sense because it was not hooked up to any pipes and it was not deep enough to affect any kind of natural groundwater. Plus, we kept the water in good condition. There was no pollution in it at all. I refused to get rid of the pond and they were threatening to fine me $60,000 a day until I got rid of it. I still refused because I was not gonna let the federal government push me around and stop me from doing something I was in my rights to do. I was willing to fight them over this matter no matter how long it took. What I didn't think was a 3-year legal battle would ensue where they made good on their word to keep adding money to my total fine. A number that at the end of the 3 years would bankrupt me easily if they were found to win. My mother especially told me not to fight them because the government had more money and resources than I had. But I refused to just roll over because they said so. The government worked for the people and I was part of the people. We had so many inspectors coming into our yard for court purposes to check out the pond, to test all sort of things with the water. Make note of the amount of fish living in it, that there were no enclosures keeping wild animals there, just so many things that in the end were actually going to work for our side. Because to win, we had to debunk all of the claims they were trying to make. Some, like the animals, were easy because it was clear that we were not keeping anything aside from the fish and they were not in an overcrowded environment. The water being clean had a big fight with multiple rounds of testing needing to be done. They were also the entire time claiming that me building the pond in the first place was a crime and they should be found in the right simply because it exists. Going back to the "it will mess up the water supply" crap they were talking about before, I kept all of that annoying paperwork and permits I was talking about at the beginning of the story, showing that the state had already checked the land beforehand and approved what I was doing. So if they wanted to blame anybody, it should be the state government and not me, since I did everything properly. Finally, they ran out of things to try and use against us and reasons for the pond to be removed. 3 long years dealing with courts and lawyers. I think the only thing that really saved us was an organization backing us up by paying for our legal fees. I don't want to give names just in case there are haters out there, but their goal was basically less buildings and tearing down trees and more nature. Despite the stress of it all, I'm glad that I fought for what I knew was right. I did not break any laws and I'll never give in just because the person I'm fighting is bigger or has more money than I do. I built the pond to make my wife happy and I was not gonna let somebody take that happiness away from her. I know it might seem like I hate the government or something, but it's not really the point of the story. Sometimes there can be jerks and organizations within it that can be wrong and start fights they should not even have to begin with. Only then to continue because they are not able or allowed to admit that they were wrong and apologize. I don't want anarchy or the government to crumble down into nothing, but I want people to know that fighting them is not always a lost cause. Actually, aside from my mother, tons of people told me to quit, to apologize to them, and to destroy the pond to avoid losing everything I had. Even my kids at one point felt like I should give in. In some countries I know that going against the government at all is a bad idea, and if you live there then I don't recommend fighting them if it could end up in death or something. But here in the USA, I knew that I had the rights to keep my pond even if the government said otherwise. And I am happy to be typing this while in my yard stands a beautiful pond that my wife will enjoy. And I hope several generations in the future will continue to enjoy it. So yeah, Ripe Stars, it seems like OP in the end won the fight against the federal government. Props to OP for keeping the fight going and not giving up. By the way, if you've enjoyed the story so far, please don't forget to like the video and maybe leave some star emojis in the comments if you want to support me. Thank you so much, and the next one is a malicious compliance story. It starts like this. In August of 2013, I left my job as a dispatcher to pursue a new position as a buyer for a major food packaging company in their production department. Dispatching was second to my job of purchasing, however, the dispatching aspect left me working 10 to 12 hour days and being on call 100% of the time. The new company promised it would be an easy 40-hour work week with occasional overtime here and there. Unfortunately for me, I did not get this in writing and took the position as a salaried employee. I tried negotiating a 6-month review with the potential for a raise, but was declined. Oh well, the hours would be less and I was cutting my commute in half. The first month everything went well. I worked with some really cool people and I was proving that I could handle the workload with ease. Well, right around the 1-year mark, the woman who did purchasing for their maintenance department put in her 2-week notice. This was no surprise because everybody knew that she was going to school to become an RN. What was a surprise is that I was now expected to learn and perform her job as well. I already had a pretty good grasp on the first position and figured taking on the second one would be a good challenge and further prove myself as a valuable employee with maybe an extra hour's work per day. I asked again for a review, which they agreed to. Despite this company's massive financial success, they never bothered to upgrade their purchasing system for maintenance purposes. There was no inventory system nor any way to generate a proper purchase order PO in the system, so I had to manually type out everything onto an Excel spreadsheet and then generate a generic PO in the system. Then I had to track all purchases on a separate document. It was a very cumbersome system that led to me working 12-hour days again. There was no way to track a specific item to any vendor without searching through hundreds of files, POs, and hoping someone wrote a decent description. At this point, I was relying solely on the memory of the mechanics, most of which had only been there for 6 months, needing to do constant stock checks and asking the mechanics to teach me about some of the processing equipment. So I could have some idea of what I was buying. I was not always at my desk. Despite having a radio on my side at all times, the plant manager complained that I was never in my office and I needed to notify him via email or radio every time I walked away with a reason. This included going to the bathroom. This is not elementary school, and me not being at my desk does not put someone else's life at risk. I begrudgingly comply, but this is the first major strike in my mind. The rest I choked up to a loss due to my incompetence, not getting things in writing. Still, I wanted to turn this around and see if I could make this work. I learned the system we used was actually quite versatile, and with a few hours of initial setup, I could build an inventory for the maintenance side of the system and generate clear and trackable POs. Since I was salaried, I could come in on a weekend and knock it out. Halfway through my proposal to the plant manager, he cut me off and told me he didn't want to do it. I tried to explain how this would help the company monetarily and time-wise, not to mention the sad sack that got the position after me, having to deal with the same BS, but he flat out said no. So strike number 2, we are now at the end of November and into the early part of December 2014. The company is rebranding their pasta sauce line and introducing some new recipes. I had to source several new ingredients and order huge quantities for their first run, which would begin in January of 2015. It was tough, but I was making progress while also barely keeping my head above water in the maintenance department. Then I'm given the news that the woman in charge of purchasing all packaging material is taking a 2-week vacation for Christmas. My requested time off for my birthday, the week before Christmas, is being denied because I need to cover her position as well. Why? The purchasing manager has not been trained on how to make a purchase order. So now purchasing anything for the entire plant rested on my shoulders. This is now strike 3 and I began posting my resume and applying for jobs again. I was going to continue working until I found anything else to get me away from this place. By this point, I'd already discussed quitting with my girlfriend and my savings would keep me from putting her in any economic harm for at least 6 months with current spending. When I got to work the day before my birthday, I opened my email to find 16 emails from the overnight crew throwing me under the bus for not ordering a certain part. Before I could get through all of them, the plant manager was in my office explaining that I was underperforming and this couldn't happen again at risk of being fired. I showed him the emails that proved the mechanics lied about when they tried to order the part, me following up with the vendor to get a status, and the fact that the mechanic only gave me half of the information the vendor needed. I again explained my plan that would drastically reduce these issues if I had any sort of way to view past purchases, and I would have known exactly what was needed. His response was, "Just deal with it or leave." Strike 4, numbnuts. Now with the malicious compliance, I neatly stacked everything I was working on depending on their status, forwarded a few emails to back up my side to my personal mail, and sent an email to the purchasing manager, plant manager, HR, and production manager explaining that I was leaving the company effective immediately and where everything was that I was working on. I included my address to send my final 2 checks to. It was always wrong on my paychecks, which I had several emails asking them to correct, but they handed them out on payday, so it was not a huge issue. I collected my things and walked out the door, past all of their offices, which were all empty. Had they been there, I would have stopped to explain. Now my revenge. A few days later, in what was the normal payday, I received my typical automatic deposit. It was only for the last full period I worked and didn't include the few days I worked into the next period or my accrued vacation time. I had also not received the check stub, which arrived nearly a week later with the incorrect address. It was delivered to the address on the envelope and then finally made its way to me after being returned to the mail carrier. Before I sent another email asking them to correct the address, I decided to look up state laws on payment upon termination of employment. Oh, was it eye candy. In my state, if someone quits, they must receive all owed payment within 72 hours. For every day late after that, they are to pay the person as if they were still employed. If they pay on day 4, they are to add 1 additional day's pay. Also, any previous agreement of automatic deposit is voided upon the termination of employment unless there is a written agreement at that time. There was also a list of state fines associated with each infraction. I composed my email to HR and explained the laws they were violating, as well as requested they update my address. And if they would mail me my final check within 2 days, I would not pursue any legal action. I hoped they would reply with reason. This would all be settled by the middle of the week, which was December 31st, and also 2 days before the next scheduled payday. Their response the next day stated that I would receive my automatic deposit on Friday, since I had agreed to that upon my initial employment, and also stated in the employee handbook, which I should refer to. Now you screwed up. It's never a good idea to mess with a guy used to working with contracts and now, thanks to you, has nothing but free time. This time I replied with direct links to the state's website and the laws they were violating, and stating how simple this would be in court. Ignorance of the law is never an excuse, but I I found these laws referenced in the employee handbook, proving they had knowledge, been made aware of it by me, and still actively went against it. All I wanted was what I was due and not asking for anything extra. There was no response until the next day, the deadline I gave them, when FedEx knocked at my door with an envelope containing my check stub. Not an active check, my account had no deposits until that Friday when the normal payday was scheduled. At this point, I'm actually impressed with their carelessness and oversight in messing with someone who literally has all day to himself. Now it's time to make a real request for everything I can legally ask for. This email again explained all of the laws they violated and requested the full amount due. I even calculated the amount they owed me for the late payment, 16 days minus the 72 hours rounded down to the nearest $5 because I'm a generous person. I had kept every email professional because I know that if this goes to court, I cannot look like a complete ass. I already had walking out on a job against me, and again hoping that they would side with reason, I detailed how much extra can be awarded to me, up to 3 times the late payment amount plus a total of the state fines. Their reply this time was simply no. The court documents were downloaded and filled out the following Monday, but I was gonna give them one last chance. Another email again detailing the law and the corresponding sections of their employee handbook, citing these laws and how ignorance of the law is no defense but explicit knowledge and failure to follow them would not be in their favor. To add a little additional spice, I copied the CEO on this email. I concluded the email requesting resolution by the end of the week or court documents would be filed. An hour later, I received a response from HR that their lawyer would contact me by the end of the week. By that Friday, I had a check for the late payment plus a second check for double the amount if I agreed to not take them to court, which I did agree to. Back to what I alluded to in the beginning, since this was now reported income for the 2015 year, I would need a W-2 from the company in order to file my taxes. So then, on the day I received those checks, I set a reminder to pursue whatever course I could if they failed to do so. My dreams were dashed when my girlfriend sent me a picture of the envelope when it arrived. I even made sure to verify every cent just in case. In the end, I'm happy it didn't resort to that. I now have a great job and career path, and I don't want to waste any more time on an old employer. And yeah, Ripe stars props to OP for fighting the long fight and not even being petty or vindictive in the end. And yeah guys, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts. Furthermore, you can find bonus content by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or by clicking the join button here on YouTube. For a small monthly fee, you will get access to dozens and dozens of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.